Going live now.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. My name is Durodoluwa. I'm the co-founder of International Climate Change Development Initiative, and I'm super excited to be here today for our first edition of Climate Wednesday. Today, I'm going to be talking to one of the vibrant young person in the industry as well. And why we are doing this is because we want to actually enlighten and let people understand why we are doing this. Um, the issue of plastic pollution is very, very big, and everybody's talking about this across the world.
Yeah.
And Nigeria is one of the countries that is also at the verge of talking about the issue of climate change, issue of plastic pollution, and how we can make sure that all stakeholders get involved in making sure that we beat plastic pollution. And that is why today we are going to be talking about reducing plastic pollution with extended producer responsibility. And our friend here, Durodoluwa, Femi-Ajala, is going to be giving us some important aspect of what we need to do and how these two things are related. And also, she's going to be giving us a little bit of recommendation on how we can take responsibility and how young people, older generation, and people across the value chain can also be part of the solution. So I'll be going straight to my fellow sister. Hi, Duro. How are you doing?
I'm fine. Hi, Olumide. It's good to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for joining us today, and we are very happy to be having you as our first guest for this year climate Wednesday.
Yeah, I'm
So,
happy.
so just to quickly go straight to the conversation for today, let me introduce you to our guest. Her name is Durodoluwa Femi-Ajala. Is an environmental sustainability advocate who believes in the need for an ever progressing environment. She's a co-founder of Youth Sustainability Development Conference and a volunteer manager for International Climate Change Development Initiative. I personally have known Duro for a couple of years now, and I'm very sure that today is going to be giving us a very, information and details, solution, and recommendation for this particular conversation today. And I'm very sure that as much as we can, let us listen and hear from her what you want to actually tell us and how she's going to be making sure that all our conversation lead to a solution that Nigeria, Africa, and the general entire world is going to be, appreciating. And I want to also let you know that if you have any questions, drop them in the comment box on our Facebook, on our Twitter handle, and even you can also draw your comment as well on our Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. So today, I'm sure that we are very much welcome to engage yourself with what Duro is going to be telling us. So, in other words, let me quickly also say that can Duro introduce herself again, apart from what I've said? Tell us about yourself, what you do, and what drives you to be doing what you are doing now.
Thank you, Olumide. So I'll just reiterate what Olumide has said. I adopt everything he has said about me. Then, in addition to what he has said, I also have a blog. I have my own personal blog. It's an environmental sustainability blog. You can find me at www.d like D for Duro thegreenadvocate.wordpress.com. You can also find me on Instagram at that. Then I'm also a 500 level law student at University of Lagos, and I'm a proud Akokite at that. Yeah, so basically that's it. For environmental sustainability, I think what brought me into this light was the waste, because I always had this burden about waste pollution. So that's what started my whole life in the whole sustainability aspect, the whole environmental aspect. And that's why I also have my own organization. I co-found another organization that is on sustainability, youth empowerment, which is what Olumide said earlier on, the Youth Sustainability Development Conference. And that's also why I'm a part of ICCDI. So that's a bit about me. Thank you so much,
Yeah,
Olumide.
Thank you very much, Duro. And that is very, very interesting. Trying to make sure that you gain knowledge in different aspects of space, of environmental issues. And I also
Yes,
want
yes.
to appreciate your effort towards making sure that you are not only learning alone, you also,
Mm-hmm.
gaining more experience by taking people along, like the
Mm-hmm.
platform that you just mentioned about the sustainability platform that you guys are
Mm-hmm.
working, make sure that
Mm-hmm.
everybody are part of what you are doing. Thank you very much for that. So quick, so that we don't
Thank
take
you.
much of our time, let us go
Yes.
quickly into our conversation. Looking at
Mm.
the issue of plastic pollution, which is a very big conversation in the space now.
Very big.
You can see a lot of young people taking responsibility. You can see a lot of recycling companies in Lagos, even across
Mm-hmm.
Nigeria. A lot of things really going on. People are trying to make
Yeah.
sure they beat plastic pollution. So I will quickly want to ask, what is extended producer responsibility, and how is this very important to us?
Okay, thank you so much, Olumide. So, like the name denotes, extended producer responsibility, it's as simple as that, meaning that the government policymakers want to ensure that any producer, any manufacturer has an extended producer responsibility, has a responsibility for the life cycle of its product. So it doesn't only include plastics, it can include electronic waste, anything that probably is manufactured. So the policymaker is always a policy-based approach. The policymakers always want to ensure that aside from you producing whatever you're producing, you also have to ensure that you have a responsibility to curtail the damages your product makes to the society. It can be social, it can be economic, it can be environmental, but to ensure that your product has, like, you have responsibilities for the life cycle of your product. So that is basically what environmental extended producer responsibility is in a nutshell. And it's also to note that extended producer responsibility is not a CSR obligation. It's not meant to be part of your CSR. It is essentially a sustainability business practice. It's meant to be part of your business lifestyle. So if you run a business, it's meant to be inculcated into your business practices. And sometimes we have the mandatory extended producer responsibility. We have one that's voluntary, but it all depends on the policies that are on ground. And even from some of the things I'll be saying here, you get to realize the importance of having an extended producer responsibility. And it's something that governments are pushing for. It's the EPR was, we came into light in around the 1990s thereabout, and it's something that a lot of government have started to push for. So you can see it in the international community, you can see it in the European Union, you can even see it in Africa, in Asia. So you can see that it has extended, not just it started from a country. But Olumide, are you saying something?
No, you can continue.
Okay, so it started from a country, but you can see that it has extended, it has expanded to every other country. And there are different ways, and this is another thing we should know. There are different ways in which extended producer responsibility can take. So it's not just about, so we have the take back mechanism, we have the take back schemes. Take back schemes are basically that there can be a depot somewhere, your producer can be like, oh, we have this depot. So if you have plastics, you can come and probably return your plastic to this depot and we will recycle. So recycling is one of the major advantages or the importance of which people actually benefit from extended producer responsibility, in that the producers themselves that are producing these products are the ones that are going to be the ones recycling it. Aside from that, aside from the take back schemes, you also have the deposit refund. Deposit refund scheme is one that is, so you also have economic schemes. Economic schemes is they are schemes that basically deal in the economical side of the environmental sustainability aspect, meaning that obviously government organizations are into whatever they are into for money making. So obviously there has to be a sort of incentive for me wanting to recycle my waste, or me wanting to, be take responsibility for any product I produce. So because of this part of the economic scheme, there are always incentives to extended producer responsibilities, which government policymakers always push. We also have, like I was saying, deposit refund scheme, meaning that you deposit probably when you're buying a bottle. Let's, in this instance, you're talking about plastic bottles. If you're buying a plastic bottle, instead of just paying outrightly 15 naira, you're probably going to deposit an extra 15 naira. So when you return that bottle, you can get a partial refund or you can get a full refund of the money you just gave in. So these are different instances of which government policymakers want to for push for extended producer responsibility. There are different ways in which we can push for it. And the reason why we are pushing for it, we have to bring it back to why we need to push for all these things, not just for plastic pollution, but for every other product, because there are too many things going on now. There are too many products being disposed into the environment, and we need to curtail the production of so many of the products. Bringing it back to plastic pollution. Plastic pollution is causing a menace to society, which is why everybody is trying to champion beat plastic pollution. Everybody is trying to say that, oh, plastic pollution has adverse effects on the environment, and we're actually literally seeing that. It's not just statistics that are showing that, but we can see the effects of plastic pollution to the environment. So you can see the reasons why people are pushing for not just, so there are different ways in which you can curtail plastic pollution, but this is also extended producer responsibility is also another means by which you can curtail plastic pollution, because it says that by 2050, at the only 2050, there will be more fishes and there'll be more plastic in the sea than fishes. So you can see there are so many reasons why plastic pollution needs to be curtailed. Plastic pollution also causes climate change, and climate change is another big issue we are currently facing in the world of today. So there's so many things that are involved in extended producer responsibility, and it also relates to a circular economy. That's another thing you should note. So people are championing circular economy. Extended producer responsibility can be seen to be part of the circular economy, which is closing the loop. So a circular economy basically denotes that everything can be recycled, everything can be reused, everything can be reduced. So there's a loop kind of thing going on in the circular economy, that one thing relates to another thing, that relates to another thing. Nothing is wasted in a circular economy. And extended producer responsibility can also be related to the polluter pay principle, which is an international law concept, a polluter pay principle. And as the name denotes, it means that if you pollute a place, you have to pay for it. That's the whole point of the polluter pay principle, PPP. So you can see how extended producer responsibility relates to individual lives, relates to the economics we live in, relates to the governmental fair, relates to the international fair of things. So, and we have different, so sometimes, do you want to say something?
Yes, I want to cut you a little bit, because I don't want you to push everything out. So, yeah, you've been saying a lot about a lot of principles, a lot of things that is going on in space, which I think a lot of people watching us also want to also digest them, so that you don't get too much information. Let me quickly go to, I think you're about to mention it, but let me quickly go to this. What are the inputs, or when you talk about what are the inputs of international bodies such as the United Nations towards this area, which is, I think, is one of the important things that will let our audience to understand that international body also have their own role to play towards this. Can you please give us a little bit of understanding to that?
Sorry, excuse me. So yeah, the international system has a huge role to play. So as the national system, the municipal systems, they have a huge role to play. International bodies have a huge role to play. And let me start from where we are, because I'm currently in Nigeria. So we also obviously have the African Union. So sometimes the international system or the international bodies might not outrightly say extended producer responsibility, but in some of their documents, they have expressed the need for having a circular economy. Like we have in the African Union, they have the Durban Declaration, which is on environmental sustainability. And if we look closely at that declaration for the African Union, you get to see that a lot of things were mentioned about the society. You had plastic pollution, you had climate change, you had so many things about environmental sustainability listed in the document for it. So the document was really talking about a circular economy. So you can see the steps that several the African Union is taking, and even from the African Union, you get to see several countries that have done several things within their own fair. Like in Nigeria, we have an EPR operational guideline, which is under the NESHRA. NESHRA is like the environmental body for Nigeria, which is under NESHRA. So you can get to see that aside from having it on the international level, it also comes down to the national level for them to actually start doing work. So if you also take it to the United Nations, and talk about the Basel Convention. Basel Convention, there have been several ratifications to the Basel Convention, and it really talks about waste. So from this, you get to see that the international community is also concerned with plastic pollution. And one of the ratifications it has had for the Basel Convention was on plastic pollution, saying that plastic pollution can also be a hazardous waste, which was what the Basel Convention is really all about, hazardous waste. So you can get to see that the international community has also seen the need for us to curtail our plastic pollution because it's becoming a menace to society. So there are several ways in which the international bodies are being, that is a tool for curtailing plastic pollution. Then you also have other intergovernmental organizations like OECD, that is the Organization for Economic Cooperative and Development. So this is another this organization is really a champion for extended producer responsibility. Like if you just go on their website and you look under the environmental icon, you get to see so many things that they are championing for extended producer responsibility in the environmental scheme, things several. So you can say that it's not just only state bodies like the UN, African Union, but you also have the intergovernmental organizations like OECD that are also championing movements on, and that's also an international body. So you can see that there are several layers to this, that is not just a one-off thing that it's just a national body or it's just an individual thing, but it's also things that is transmuted to the international system, and they're like, okay, if they can be a part of this, then why not? So you can get to see that the international flavor is also in the extended producer responsibility. So Olumide, I hope I've answered the question.
Yeah, you did justice to that, and I can tell you that I'm sure that a lot of people watching will be able to learn and get understanding of the EPR, because this is a conversation that is going around the place now. And a
Yeah.
quick one for the understanding of the international bodies like the UN on towards this EPR. Are there countries that have adopted this approach, and what has it achieved so far?
There are so many countries, and I have to give kudos to the European Union because they're like one of the champions for things that have to do with EPR, environmental practice and environmental sustainability. And so there are so many countries that have actually started, and like I said, EPR started around the 90s. So obviously, if you had a country that was championing, like Germany is a country that really took initiative of EPR, and you get to see that in its packaging scheme. So the packaging scheme is basically that it's an EPR scheme, and it's like I said, you know how I spoke about different ways in which EPR can exist. There's no one size fits all for EPR. There are several ways in which EPR policies can be presented into society. One of that is the take back scheme, and that is what Germany has done with its own packaging scheme, meaning that like they take back your packaging and they recycle it, which is also one of the importance of extended producer responsibility. Then you also have the UK also on packaging scheme, and one of the things they employed was tradable credit schemes, meaning that if a tradable credit scheme is, if I probably do not meet my own everybody has a quota, everybody has a recycling quota, tradable recycling credit scheme, everybody has a recycling quota. So if I do not meet my own recycling quota, but you met yours, and your own, probably the recycling quota is like 60 or 70%, and you met your own recycling quota probably like an 80%, you can trade me your credit, probably because I didn't meet mine at 50%. You can trade me your credit and you can have that balance. So they also looked at the system. So there are several ways in which extended producer responsibility can take, but so far it's on a lot of the burden is on the producer who produces the products or whatever. So far the burden is on the producer, then it can be a scheme. And they also have non-extended producer schemes that also help in plastic pollution. Like there's one like landfill bans, meaning that there are specific things that you can't send to the landfill. Like in some countries, they have said that you can't send things like e-waste to the landfill because it's a landfill ban. So that's also a non-EPR scheme to also curb certain waste. So you can see that a lot of countries are actually part of it, and it's not only for plastic pollution. So a lot of, like we have in Canada does in e-waste France, China. So there are so many Asian countries, there are so many European countries, even the US. So in the US you have, but so corporate organizations in the US have their own, but their own is more voluntary. So you can have the mandatory scheme, you can also have the voluntary scheme, meaning that probably 2-3 organizations, producer responsible organizations come together and say that they want to take up this initiative on their own, and then they now be so it's not voluntary for them. It's not mandated for them. It's not a policy given to them by the government. It's something that they are taking initiative of because they want to obviously curtail the plastic pollution within, or curtail any kind of waste within their society. So that's on different countries. So there are so many countries that have taken up this initiative. And in Africa, like I said before, Nigeria has its own operational guideline for EPL, and you also have in South Africa. South Africa has one for a circular economy. So it might not necessarily be called an EPL policy, but because of the intricacies in it, because of what it involves, you can get to see that there are EPL schemes, even with things that are not called EPL schemes. They are probably called circular economy, or things that can be related to EPL schemes. So that's another aspect to it. So yeah.
Okay,
Over to you.
Thank you very much. That was very, very interesting. And but I think you did not actually mention about Nigeria. I don't know whether you mentioned Nigeria.
I mentioned Nigeria, but
yeah. What can you say about the situation in Nigeria? What is your view about the EPL in Nigeria?
Okay, so I have to say this. Although we have an operational guideline which is under NESRA. That's one thing we should know. We have an operational guideline which is under NESRA. But it's not fully effective. I have to give it to that. But I still think that we can do more than we are actually doing now. Because if you look at countries that have started this fight since probably in the 90s, I think we got our own in I can't remember the day, but I think it's that 2016 or 2019 that we had our own operational guidelines. So it's still like a work in progress. It's not something that is fully fleshed out or something that has started its work. But I still believe that we need to hold a lot of companies accountable. Like there has to be a one size fits all the standard. Every company has to have a basic standard that one company cannot violate this law and get away scot-free. Another violates it and that one gets a punitive measure. So there has to be a certain level of standard for all organizations that are part of the schemes that are under the Nigerian system. So it's not for the operational guideline, it's not something that has actually started being implemented. So it's another thing that we can start looking at in Nigeria to ensure that, a lot of countries are doing this. So why can't we also start doing this? Why can't we ensure that EPR schemes and extended producer schemes or the extended producer policy in Nigeria is actually being implemented to the full letter, to what is actually being stated in the black and white? So that's another thing you have to look at for the Nigerian system, because so many things are into play. And one thing we also have to mention is the fact that we have to know what works for us. We have to look at our locality and know what works for us, because earlier I mentioned that there are so many environmental extended producer responsibility schemes that any government can take, and there's no one size fits all. So you might want to say that I want to have a take back scheme, but you can't just have one EPL scheme. You can't just have one EPL policy, because that might not give you the return you actually desire. It might not give you, so you might want to incorporate 2-3 EPL schemes into your policy to ensure that, okay, certain areas are, so you have the financial, you have the physical, so there are so many things involved. So it's not just having just one, maybe the take back, so you can have the advanced recycling fee. That's another way in which EPL policies work. Advanced recycling fee, take back, deposit refund schemes. Then you also have there sometimes even the government, because they want to ensure that organizations are into this and they incentivize the process, they give tax subsidies. So obviously if I'm a company and I'm going to have a tax subsidy just because I'm recycling, that's going to make me want to recycle, because I'm going to have a tax subsidy on my taxes. Then you also have the material taxes. Material taxes means that if I'm doing my taxes, I'm being taxed on my materials. So that's going to obviously encourage recycling, because if I'm being taxed on my materials, on probably newer materials I'm using, then obviously I want to go and recycle the materials I've used before. So these are schemes that a country like Nigeria can take can actually use in its whole letters, like can actually be part of. So it's not just about having one scheme or the other scheme, but Nigeria, because of the kind of society we are in, we have to look at the people that are there. Are so many considerations before you actually adopt a particular EPR scheme: the political and social acceptance, the people. You have to have consultations. You have to have so many things involved. It's not just about developing a scheme and saying we're going to dump this scheme on you. You have to the efficiency, if the policy can actually be effective and efficient in your society, you have to look at that. You have to look at the political consideration. Obviously, there are so many political backings within any policy that will be implemented. There are so many things, even the waste management system. You have to look at that critically to ensure that the EPL scheme you're putting down for your country, you're ensuring that it aligns to your waste management scheme. Then you obviously also have to consider the problem of the local waste managers or the local recyclers, people that obviously, like in Nigeria, it's not everybody that recycles, but you have people that probably have a wheelbarrow and they're collecting your plastics. So you obviously have to have a way for you to incorporate those things. You have to have a way for you to incorporate the local waste managers, the local recyclers into your own scheme. There has to be a full-fledged, it's like you're doing the project management. You have to consider every kind of indices that is required before you launch your EPL policy. And that's another thing that we have to consider in Nigeria before we start our EPL, because I know we have our operational guidelines, but it's not fully effective. So if we're going to probably go back to it and review it and ensure that it is actually what Nigeria needs, actually what we can actually start then and then. So
Thank you very much. And I think I will have two more questions before we go. But quickly, for our audience watching, following this conversation, please try as much as possible, drop your comments, your questions, so that we can throw this question to our guest. I'm sure our guest is also, she can also see this Q&A, the Q&A section. So guys, please drop it in as much as possible. We can be able to attend to this. This call is just for 1 hour, but if we're able to finish in 1 hour, then that is fine and good. So Duro, thank you very much for telling us more about how countries are adopting to this approach and what have they've been able to achieve so far. But quick one, in a country with these policies, do you think there is any frontal penalties, and what are kind of effective has it become? How are they approaching this in a way whereby it's sustainable, in a way whereby people actually follow the policy? Because the story over here is that a lot of policies are not really effective. So if such EPR come to Nigeria, how is it going to be more effective? How do you think it's going to really help us? So can you give us a country that have been able to, you've mentioned South Africa, you've mentioned some countries, but when it comes to that, what are the penalties that are being given to those kind of people that are going against this kind of policy?
Okay, so one thing I have to mention is that there are many voluntary schemes for EPR. So not all policies are mandatory. There are so many voluntary schemes that obviously will not have any punitive measure attached to them. It's voluntary on probably within the policy, the government can say it's a voluntary scheme. You really do not have to partake in this because it's voluntary. We do not want to force anybody against the rule. But if you partake in this scheme, there are so and so benefits attached to you partaking in this scheme. And there are others that are mandatory, like it is mandated for you to be a part of this scheme. And we have so many of that too. And for people that, I'll start with the mandated one. So which also relates to your question. So for countries that have mandated policies or EPL schemes, there are usually fines attached to them. But So the question now is, will I want to pay? Because obviously it's just like have the polluter pay principle, like I mentioned earlier in the discussion. Just because I pollute doesn't mean I'll end up paying. So it's not really about it being mandated or the fines attached to them, because as an organization, I can decide to violate your law and still pay. So it's really not about the payment, but it's about the culture that is developed, which is why a lot of policies are voluntary. And the reason why is because that if you have the voluntary scheme, you have a lot of incentives attached to them. So even if it's not mandatory, mandated, I as a company, I as an organization would want to be a part of that scheme, or want to actually accept that scheme, because I have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H incentives attached to it. So that is, so it's kind of a lucrative business for organizations to go into, because I know that I'm getting so and so in return. And like your tax incentive, like I mentioned before, tax subsidies, these are another avenue for the economy, or rather the government, to make not the government, the organizations, to make subsidies on their own tax. So if I know I'm going to recycle, or I'm going to have an advanced recycling fee, so an advanced recycling fee it can be likened to a tax. So it's more like it can be incorporated into your cost price when you're buying a retail good. Probably if you want to buy a brand, so it can be like, it's like a value similar to a value added tax, but it's not a value added tax, but it can be added to your price, or it can be embedded into the product, into the product production, into the product production. Hello?
Continue.
Okay. So, or it can be embedded into the production of the product. So you really don't get to see it as a tax. So it's still, so at the end of the day, the advanced recycling fee comes to the company, because if you are buying it as a retail price, you get to have the money at the end of the day. Although that money is specific for the recycling of that good. So there are so many incentives that even if I'm not mandated to have this, to be part of this scheme, I would still want to be a part of it, because I can benefit so much from it. And you also have organizations like we have the PROs, as a producer responsibility organization. So this can be like a third party organization that helps you, that probably takes the burden from you. So you can have like a group of companies. We also have about 2 of that in Nigeria, that producer responsibility organization. You have about 2 of that in Nigeria, that they probably like take the burden from you. They can either be a third party, or a group of similar, a group of people within the same industry, a group of organizations within the same industry that probably producing the same product. They can come together, or they can give it out to a third party and say, take care of our probably our waste, probably recycle it, do something about it. But we are obviously ensuring that our waste are being taken care of. So as the producers, we know that our waste is being taken care of by the producer responsibility organization, or it can even be the organizations themselves coming together and saying that we want to take care of our waste together, and probably have a recycling waste. So you can see that there are so many, and if you do that, there are so many benefits added to your company because of that. And one of the benefits of EPR schemes is that even at the long run, if you look at OECD reports, that it also increases your GDP, it increases the country's GDP. So you can see that it translates from, so it's not just about me, an organization recycling their waste, but it also translates to the national government themselves. That if you're involved in EPR schemes, that over the years that countries that are involved in EPR schemes, that it actually helps their country to grow GDP wise. Then at the end of the day, you might also have, so this might not be directly linked, but design for environment is another issue. It's another thing that can also be part of your product. So a design for environment is that your product now becomes environmentally sustainable, meaning that you probably found an alternative to designing your product. So that's designed for environment. So your product now becomes environmentally sustainable, but it's not every organization that ends up opting for a DFE. It's not every organization, but sometimes it does translate to that. So you can see that even if you might have fines for the mandated policies, like fines attached to them. The question is not really about me paying or me not paying, the voluntary against the mandated. It's about what I can get from the policies, which is what a lot of organizations look at, because obviously the organizations are into it for money making. Most of the organizations are into it because they want to make profit. So anything that can make them profit or reduce costs or make them feel more beneficial, or make their business more sustainable, they will obviously want to be a part of it. So that is what we get to see in a lot of APR schemes, which is why it's quite popular in a lot of countries.
Yeah, thank you very, very much. That was so impactful. I think you've been able to touch some very great part of this conversation. You that a lot of people that want to actually also go into plastic business, like there is this association in Lagos State that there's Recycling Association of Nigeria. I'm very sure we're going to be having some of them on our platform very soon to come and tell us more about this information, and for you to open this 2021 in a very good note with this great conversation. I think is sending a message to us as a country to start looking at sustainable way of making use of our plastic, and how we can make sure that we reuse, we reduce, and we recycle them, which is very, very important. And also, getting here from again is that we need to start looking at how can we, try to adapt to the policies when they come out, so that all of us can be part of the implementation strategy, not only part of the talking, but how can we be part of the implementation? How can we also ensure that when this policy comes, we are able to follow up thoroughly, and it gets us to where we want to be in Nigeria. So I think we are rounding down for this conversation, and I will quickly want to ask you to give us like a recommendation. What are the roles of individual? Maybe you can take it step by step. Roles of individuals, roles of government in pushing the EPA policies, and what can we do to make sure that these policies is part of our daily lives, and we help us try to beat the so-called plastic pollution in Nigeria.
Okay, thank you so much. So from everything I've said today, I think those are like the recommendations, everything. But one thing that actually stands out, like what you said, told me to talk about it from the individual perspective, the governmental perspective. Then I also talk about it from the international body perspective. So let's start from the individual, but everything goes hand in hand basically, because one cannot do without the other. So from the individual perspective is that don't stop doing whatever you're doing, because there are so many individuals that are interested in the environment, or probably want to be part of the environmental sector, or probably see things that they want to stop or curb and they see a problem with it, that you can obviously start doing something within your environment. You can start championing causes within your environment, join a sustainability group, an environmental group, volunteer. It's never too late to volunteer. It's always a big yes for volunteering. And just keep pushing it basically, and educate yourselves on the need to have an environmental sustainable policies basically, and which is what we have the EPR. Understand the reasons why we need an EPR policy. It may not even be an EPR policy, but something else that has to do with environmental sustainability. Understand the reasons why that these things, understand the problems, the issues. Only when you understand the problems, only when you understand the issues, can you then now find the solution to the problems. So if you do not understand the problems yourself, then you can't find a solution to the problem. So you have to understand the problems first. So once you understand the problems, you can now start taking a step forward. So whatever step you take, probably if you want to found your own organization, if you want to join an organization, if you want to champion the cause, if you want to do anything that has to do with ensuring that your environment is safe. Because one of the things I'm also like, if you have environmental rights, because in Nigeria, environmental rights are non-justiciable. So if you probably see a problem with that, and you want to ensure that environmental rights become justiciable, you want to ensure that environmental rights are things that you can go to court and say this person violated my environmental right, just as much as you can say that this person violated my right to dignity, then these are things you can start pushing for. So you're just finding a problem where a particular problem that addresses or speaks to you and pushing you with all your heart. Then for the governmental side for EPR policies is that, especially relating to Nigeria, is to find the best that fits you, find the best policies that fit a country, find the best policies that can be localized. It's not just about getting a policy from another country and adopting it into our own country or adopting it into what is being seen in our country, whatever it is. No, it's about finding the best fit for your country, because there are so many differences between our country and Ghana, even if it's very close to us. You can what can work for us might not be able to work for Ghana. What can work for Ghana might not be able to work for us. So it's about finding essentially what is best for your country and ensuring that it can actually be implemented. Now, implementing it how? How do you implement it? That is where PPP comes in, public and private partnerships. You have to be able to work with the private sector. The private sector has to be able to work with the public sector. Those two have to go hand in hand to ensure that this can actually be brought to light, that implement. And you have to also involve the youth, which is where the youth also come in. The youths are a voice. They are like the pillars that hold any nation together. Without the youth, the country is most likely old, and there's really not a lot of things that you can actually do without the youth. So you have to also involve the youth in whatever you're doing. And it's not just about eye service, let me put it like that. It's not just about the it's not about eye service or whatever you want to do, but it's about ensuring that whatever you're doing is actually for the people. It's not just about getting the money, that is getting the money into your pot, or corruption or all this type of thing, but you're ensuring that these things actually put to good use for the system, for the government, for the institutions, for everybody that will be part of these things. These things are put to good use, and you ensure that you can see a return on your investment. It's not just about saying that, oh, go out and do whatever you want, but ensuring that there is a step-by-step process that you're actually following. Then you can also work with other governments within your field. You work with other because obviously, even if a country is territorial, but you also have surrounding countries that you can work with. So, and obviously, one country's ways to obviously affect your own country. So, working with countries that are close to you territorially, working with them, ensuring that both of you are going hand in hand. You can have bilateral agreements, multilateral agreements, whatever you have to do to ensure that your country actually moves forward. Then you also have the international community. And like I mentioned before, we have so many conventions. We have the Basel Convention for the United Nations. We have the Durban Convention for the African Union. So these are similar conventions that talk about environmental sustainability, that you can, and basically ensures that countries under their domain can be environmentally sustainable. So you can latch on to this. So if you're a government and probably don't know where to start from, or if you're an individual that you probably don't know where to start from, or a private sector or a CSO, you can start reading up on those documents and start understanding those documents. So it helps you to grow your knowledge base. Then you can, and there's also volunteering opportunities in so many international bodies that you can also latch on to. Then for international bodies, because they are the international sector, they are the international things, so obviously they're involved in so many other things. So it's left for them to ensure that, probably if it has to do with environmental sustainability, they are key persons that they are working with to ensure that governments, private sector, the individuals are actually in line and they're getting everything that is being said is being implemented, because they can have so many conventions or so many declarations that are not being implemented, but are just in black and white. So it's also left for them that, just as nations, just as we have in countries just black and white letter laws that are not being implemented, so we have so many conventions, so many declarations that are also not being implemented. So it's also left for them to ensure that whatever they are pushing out there is something that their region can actually implement it in the long term, and don't just create policies that will be redundant in the next 2 years or in the next 10 years. Create sustainable policies that, even if you have the 2063 policy or 2063 declaration in African Union, what are the step-by-step process to ensure that we achieve it in 2063? We can't just have a 2063 declaration and leave it till when we get to 2060 or 2050 and we now start working on it. No, we have to start working on it now. The time we have to start working on it is now. So that's how every international body has to be working on it. Like we have the 2030 agenda for the United Nations, but work has started. So also for every other international body, if you have any work has to start now. You can't just wait until when the deadline is closed before work has to start. So basically, that is the recommendations I have for
Yeah,
this.
yeah. Thank you very much, Duro. It was let me say it's very, very interesting that your points are very interesting because I'm sure a lot of people have been thinking about how they can get involved individually and what can be their role in taking responsibility as well. And from what
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing here, let me start from what somebody just said. Somebody said, no doubt plastic have been a major pollutant to the environment,
Mm-hmm.
especially in our water bodies, and also talk about refuse are dumped, anyhow. And some people are also saying that is the information you are giving out is very, very key and important. And somebody is asking a question here that how can the average Nigerian be aware of their role in this initiative? Also, how do we encourage more people to recycle? For instance, there is a lady who can recycle. There's a lady who recycle into bags. For he's giving an example. And there's another question here that he said, how serious is Nigerian taking the policy, and how can you, your team, get them to take this policy serious? And he concludes by saying that youth are the pillars that hold the country together. Let me summarize. I think the question I think you've really touched on it, but I think
Yeah.
also give us, because he is actually emphasizing on how can we encourage more people to recycle. I think it's also
Mm-hmm.
part of this conversation, and
Mm-hmm.
she's also saying that what can young people do to make sure that this policy, how can we advocate for this policy to be implemented and follow up? That's the question.
Okay, so for the recycling one, because I mentioned EPL's extended producer responsibility basically is like one of the pillars of extended producer responsibility is recycling, because obviously the producers they have the return of their products. So obviously they're getting their products back. So obviously it's encouraging recycling. So the question was, how can we encourage recycling? Yes, just to be sure.
That's
How
it.
can we encourage?
How can
Okay.
we encourage recycling among,
How can we encourage the
yes,
youth?
yeah, more people to recycle? For instance, I gave an instance of a lady doing recycling, turning it to bag. So
Okay,
how
yes,
can
yes.
we encourage more
How
people?
can we? Okay, so now the first thing that people have to know is people need to understand, they need to know that this can actually, there's something called recycling. Now, the time I was part of this recycling agencies, and we did a lot of outreaches because of people needed to understand the import of what recycling is. Because if you talk to the average Nigerian, they don't see the need for recycling, they don't see the importance of recycling. So one of the, even if you might think a lot of people know, people still need to be re-educated on the need to have recycling within their schemes. Then you talk about encouraging recycling. So now, if you have like the example you gave that talked about recycling from one thing and she turns it into bags. So you also have different, aside from recycling, you have upcycling. Upcycling is another form of recycling that, aside from taking it from one form, from plastic to plastic, you're taking it probably from, you're recycling a tire and turning it into decoration. So that's upcycling. So it's more of encouraging the skill of recycling, encouraging people to know that you can make money out of recycling itself. So that's why we have the informal recycling sector, which is also what I spoke about earlier on, that we have to find a way, if you're talking about APR policies, you have to find a way to incorporate the informal recycling sector into your schemes. So encouraging recycling, how people need to understand that they can have a skill from recycling, that recycling might not just include the whole manufacturing, the whole big machines that are needed for recycling, but recycling can take many forms. Recycling is not just a one size fits all. So encouraging recycling means that people need to understand that recycling can be in a skill. You can have recycling, you can start doing upcycling. So people need to understand that they can get incentives from recycling, because if I have like a very big, maybe because I use PET bottles a lot, and I have a lot of PET, I can just go and say I'm looking for recycling companies that can that can take all my bottles. And a lot of recycling companies do that, and they take all your bottles and they give you incentives in the process. So these are schemes to encourage people to recycle more. And if you're talking about like having the recycling being outside your house, that's more of the governmental phase. So it's more like you're pushing the government to say that, oh, we don't want a waste collector that just collects all our waste. We want a waste collector that actually separates our waste on. Or instead of even having a one waste collector, you have several waste collectors that possibly probably from the companies, and this time you can even solicit to the companies that, okay, so if we have the EPR scheme and the EPR scheme starts to be implemented, so the producers themselves can now come and start taking your sorted waste to their own depots. So that's another way to also encourage. So it's not like a partnership, because it's not something that can be done on its own. So there are different ways to encourage recycling. People have to know, people have to understand that skills can be learned from recycling, upcycling. Then you can get incentives from just recycling, like you can get monetary value or things in kind from just recycling. And you can also advocate to probably have a partnership with a company that is recycling, so that they can also take care of your bottles. Or you can even start pushing for it within the governmental scheme or the CSOs, NGOs. So that's that for recycling. There's another question. Olumide, you're on mute.
The other question is, how serious is Nigeria taking these policies, and how can your team get them to, take these policies very serious?
Okay, so earlier on in our conversation today, I spoke about the fact that we have an operational guideline in Nigeria, an APR guideline, and it's under the NESHRA. NESHRA is the environmental arm for Nigeria, so it's under NESHRA, but it's not fully implemented. So that's one thing you have to know, that it's not fully implemented. It's not something that has really taken great strides in starting out, or it's not something that we have been able to see the full fledged value of having that policy in Nigeria. So how do we exactly start pushing for it? So now that we know, the first thing is that we know that we have a policy. So now we have to now start finding out, can this policy be actually used in Nigeria, or is this just a policy that was adopted from another country and wants to be used in Nigeria? Is something that can actually work? Because one of the things in APR is that you don't just make a policy and force it on the people. Consultations have to be made. You have to consider the social implication, the political implication, even the economic implication. The cost has to be efficient, has to be effective, because there are so many things, there are so many cost analysis that go into EPR schemes. So you have to understand that if the policy guidelines we have, or the national guideline we have in Nigeria, is it actually something that can be suited to our local reality? Is it something that individuals can take part in, or organizations can take part in? That's one of the very key areas we have to discover first before we start talking about implementing. Because if we start implementing and find out along the way that it's not something that can work, or it's not something that is sustainable, meaning that you have started a 5-year journey and you just wasted that time, and nobody has time to waste anymore. So something that we have to start and ensure that it's sustainable on the long run. Now, what my team can do about it is, I don't want to look at it as a team project. It's something that every person has a say in this. Everybody has a say to push this thing out. Everybody has a voice in this. So it's not just about saying that one team has the prerogative to start pushing this thing out, but we as Nigerians, I'm just using the Nigerian as an example because that's where I'm staying. But we as Nigerians have a right to start pushing for things we believe in and start ensuring that it's being implemented in our country. But going back to your question, as a team, obviously, like I said before, looking at the policies, looking at if it's implementable, then start the advocacy work, start the groundwork, start doing whatever that is in line with your work or is in line with your team's vision, and start doing it out. Like in ICCDI, we're all about climate change, we're all about environmental sustainability. So things that have to do with those things that we can start pushing out for. So probably consultations, partnerships that have to do with partnerships with global organizations, partnerships with local communities, partnerships with private bodies, partnerships that can go a long way to ensure that this sustainable approach is actually taken, that we can actually implement these guidelines. And for my other team in YSDC, which I'm a co-founder, is another one. Like, I ensure that people that are coming on board, so we train social entrepreneurs. So if you're a social entrepreneur, you have an idea about probably environmental sustainability, we're going to ensure that your company or the business you are bringing on board is going to be sustainable for the next, going to be sustainable true and true. It's not just a company that will start now and next 2 years you are dying out. So all those things have to be looked at. So it's more of a bigger picture. So you can't take one thing and another thing and another thing. You have to look at the bigger picture. Everything interrelates with one another. So every person has a part to play. Social entrepreneurs, individuals, private sectors, CSOs, everybody has a part to play in ensuring that the EPR policies that we have on ground is being implemented true and true. So hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. This is so informative, so great that we have you today on this first edition of Climate Wednesday. And I'm very happy that a lot of people have, been able to connect both on Facebook, on Twitter, on our YouTube account, and we make sure that we continue to, dish out great content, great information for people to understand. As you can see, January is for End Plastic Pollution, and we want you to be part of this conversation. We're going to be having this again next week, Wednesday, and we are very much open to any conversation that you want to hear from us. And let me use this opportunity to say thank you to Duro for giving us
having me
1 hour to be part of this conversation, and we look forward to have you some other time. And we hope that this conversation will actually get to the right authorities who will be able to take responsibility of the actions that we talk about. So on this note, I want to say thank you to all our listeners, all the guests, all our supporters from across the world, across Africa, across Nigeria, for listening to us today and for sharing with us on this great topic on reducing plastic pollution with extended producer responsibility, which is a very great conversation. And next week, we are going to be bringing you another guest with different topic, but focusing on beating plastic pollution, which is going to be grounded for January, because January, we want to talk more about it. We want to see how people respond to taking care of their environment and dancing to the tone of single-use plastic, because that is where all everybody is talking about now. I want to wish everybody good evening from Nigeria, good morning, good afternoon from all over the world. Thank you very much, and hope to have you another time. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.